This is a list of all the institutions. In fact, that's a lie. This is a list of some of the institutions in the European Union. And as you can see, there are a ridiculous amount. Now, one thing you need to know about the European Union in general is that it's filled with a bunch of bureaucrats. And if there's one thing that bureaucrats love, it's making things very, very difficult and complicated. And everyone wants to achieve the same goal, but they do it in a much more complicated fashion. And so one of the ways they do this is by creating lots and lots of different bodies and institutions, and then they all work for the same goal. Now, that's okay in practice, but the problem is when you're a student trying to learn EU law, it's almost impossible to memorize everything that EU law has to offer. Not only do we have 7 official institutions, 7, in the Treaty of the European Union, but there are at least 7 plus more other institutions and bodies who also help with the official bodies and who also have their own policy. That becomes a problem for students especially, and thankfully for you, I have taken the time to read about the 7 official ones and really try and break them down into 1 or 2 lines at most. And so this will give you some foundations to go on and understand what institutions actually are. But I can absolutely empathize with people who are just too bored to learn this. But actually you realize how it all kind of links in. The 7 official institutions are listed in the Treaty on the European Union in Article 13. And it's the Parliament, the Council of the EU, which is different to the European Council, the European Commission, Court of Justice, Central Bank, and the Court of Auditors. And we'll look at each one in turn and how it relates to the legislative process, because this is a law course, and so we won't be focusing on the politics of it. We'll be looking at the law. Firstly, let's map out how all the institutions relate to one another and how they actually interact. So if we take the European Council as the heads of state of each government, they would probably relate more to the European Commission because they would be in constant discussions with the European Commission on what their country needs in terms of laws. And so if the European Council is made up of presidents and prime ministers, they're going to represent the member states, and they will then go to the Commission to tell them, actually, look, we need laws on these kind of things, on specific issues, etc. The Commission would then draft up what we call a proposal. And once they draft up this proposal, it's sent to the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers, both to debate the proposal, to amend it, to scrutinize it before it actually becomes legislation itself. And eventually, after days of talking, they will end up passing the legislation, and then you'll have the law. Now, I've got a banana as the icon for this law, and I'll explain why in a minute, but that's basically the example legislation that we're going to use, a bit bananas. And so once you've passed this banana law, it can then go to 2 other institutions. The first is the European Court of Justice, and they will settle any debates that are regarding the legislation. So if someone takes the EU to court on the passing of laws to bananas, then the Court of Justice will deal with this. And you also have the Court of Auditors, which is not a court. Actually, their role is to set the budget for implementing the legislation itself. And then finally, we have the last institution, the European Central Bank. It doesn't directly relate to any legislation, but what it will do is it will regulate the euro and make sure that the rate for inflation is not too high for member state economies, and make sure actually each country's economy, or the ones who adopt the euro anyway, is sufficiently strong enough for this legislation to be implemented. So feel free to take a screenshot or to take note of this infographic here. I think this is going to be one of the most useful pictures that you might use when you study EU law.